Hello, welcome to Super Return Asia. I'm Sarah Clark and I'm joined by Dominic Ziegler from The Economist. You've served and joined the newspaper in 1986. You've done a number of roles. You're now the senior Asia correspondent and the Banyan columnist on The Economist. Tell me about basically the key issue of the region, Asia's shifting relationship with the West and the impact of the US-China relationship on the region. Asia's on a gradual shift from American dominance to something more fluid. What is this shift and who's dominating the landscape?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, Asia's been kind of ordered by the US since the end of the Second World War. It's really kind of American-led institutions that have underpinned trade and security in the region. And now it's not just that China's on the rise with its own ideas about kind of its centrality in the region. It's that America under President Donald Trump doesn't believe in a lot of these commitments that America has made in the past.
So who's at the top of the landscape? Obviously, China. How is China gradually moving its way to the top?
Well, China has always said this isn't a unipolar world, and it said that when America was the kind of hyperpower soon after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It says that it's always going to be a multipolar world, and that's partly a signal from the Chinese to say, hey, don't worry about us, because we're not going to be kings of the roost either. Well, the trouble is that, a lot of Chinese actions make neighbors wonder and worry about that. It's the scale of the Belt and Road Initiative, that's the huge infrastructure funding for the developing world, which of course is very welcome, but it also kind of increases Chinese power. It comes with China's military expansion in the South China Sea. It comes with a tougher attitude to Taiwan. And ultimately, the concern is that instead of a kind of rules-based order in the region, which is really sort of what it's been about by and large for the last 70 years, it becomes one of power struggles, spheres of influence, and kind of before the First World War. And I'm not saying that there's any kind of historical determinism, but those parallels ought to be worrying given what happened next.
So in that sense, looking at the regional conflicts, but who is benefiting from the changing dynamics in Asia? Which countries in Asia?
You see, because it's all about trade, this region, first of all, I don't think when trade wars start, and we've just seen today, the day we're talking now, we've just seen President Trump slap tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. That's nearly half of trade with China that's now got tariffs. I don't think there's any winners from any kind of power-driven trade contest. So one of the issues is, actually how do both countries find an off-ramp for this? How can they come to an accommodation? There are legitimate concerns by American businesses about the difficulties of doing business in China. Sectors are out of bounds, markets are rigged, Chinese companies get hidden subsidies, tech and intellectual property gets stolen, or you have to share it as the price of doing business in China. So there's definitely deals that could be done. The problem is that when you have a president in America who doesn't really believe in trade, he thinks that all trade is unfair, and when you have a ruler of China, Xi Jinping, whose prestige really rests on China not being seen to back down, well then I worry.
So, and it depends. His reputation depends on this. Do you see China trying to cut a deal with the United States to end this trade war?
Well, I hope China will, and certainly it's trying. The trouble is that its emissaries to Washington and Washington's emissaries to Beijing are kind of moderates, and the problem is that Trump can nix any deal that's been reached by his underlings. He did that to the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, earlier in the summer. And as Mnuchin prepares to deal with his counterpart, the Vice Premier Liu He, again, he knows that, as so does Liu He, that the risks are that the deals they pursue are not approved of by their ultimate bosses.
So who will win and when will it be over?
So I don't believe there's a win and lose thing in trade. I think all are losers. So that's my response to that. We at The Economist believe in open trade in a kind of liberal order because everybody is better off. Nobody is better off when tariffs are slapped onto goods, when there's a trade war. When will it be over? I think a lot of people thought it would be over in weeks or months, and they're starting to have second thoughts. I'm actually quite pessimistic. I think it could grind on into the new year, certainly past the November congressional elections in the US. Possibly there'll be a change of dynamic then, but even if the Democrats win the House, remember that they're not fantastically in favor of open trade. And the lobby in China calling for constructive engagement, that's what it used to be called with China, well, that's a very much smaller group of people than used to be the case. So yeah, I fear that this is probably a long and fairly grinding conflict.
And which countries do you think are going to be caught in the crossfire as it goes on?
Well, it's interesting that at the start of all this, around March or April, there were countries that thought, well, hey, we could benefit. And that included Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand. But I think they're having second thoughts now because, what Trump wants to do is to bring American manufacturing and tech back to America. He wants to basically blow up the kind of supply chains and distribution networks that have been really what Asia's been all about for the past 30 years. And I think Southeast Asian countries now realize that there are costs of that for them. Japan and South Korea, well, in many ways, they're more direct competitors with Chinese companies, particularly at the sort of upper end, the higher value end. They can see certainly a big downside in trade wars, but they're trying to kind of get closer to China. Japan in particular, it's interesting that they were at loggerheads not that long ago, but now there's a kind of rapprochement, and part of that reason is because of the sort of unpredictability of Trump and his trade wars.
Looking at another side of it, Trump's trade war, is it creating new impetus for Asia to speed up the opening of its markets, to forge closer ties to other countries outside of the United States?
Well, I would hope so. It's early days yet. I mean, you do see sides of China doing that. I mean, it's trying to keep foreign business on board by offering, market opening concessions. And, under pressure, it is sort of opening up a bit here and a bit there. It's allowed some European car companies to set up wholly owned ventures in China. It hasn't sort of led to a kind of broader liberalization yet, a kind of whole-scale liberalization in the region, but it would be nice if that's what did happen, yeah.
Your outlook for the last question, your outlook for the next 12 months. Where do you see China's economic movements or the outlook?
I think China's economy is quite fragile, quite vulnerable. Now, some people have been saying that for years and they've been proved wrong, but what China knows it needs to do is to deleverage. They've got very indebted local governments, quite indebted state companies. The problem is that if you slow down credit, the question is then how do you drive growth? I think that's an issue. I think it's probably behind this kind of slow attritional bear market that we've seen in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong stock market is now in bear market territory. And so I think, there's a kind of soft underbelly to the Chinese economy. I have to say that that's what the Americans are counting on to get the Chinese to buckle. But I think we're going to see problems in 2019, late 2018, 2019 surface around debt and particularly, around the local government financing vehicles and so forth.
Dominic Ziegler, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for joining us also. And you can find more conversations like this on Twitter. Just look for #SRAsia. Bye for now.